Hello and welcome to Tigers by the Fire, a podcast out of Holy Cross High School about World War II discussions and stories. This is Season 6, Episode 6, and today's episode will be about the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. With me today are Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter.
Kenny.
Hello, I'm Kenny.
And Jack.
Hi, I'm Jack.
And as I said, today's episode is about the assassination of SS member Reinhard Heydrich, who I know they'll get into all the different things he was in charge of, the SD, the Ensetgruppen, and all these horrible, horrible things. But he is the highest ranking Nazi official to be assassinated in the war. And in this podcast, I know we're going to get a little background on him, the plot to kill him, and then we'll have a good discussion about price of resistance, which is something I know Kenny and Peter, they came with me last year to Poland. And so we'll bring some actual remnants of that trip because we can talk about the uprisings in Poland as well at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Peter for our context.
Right. So we thought it would be great to start off with some context so you understood why he was killed and assassinated, why they felt like there was such a need to assassinate him. But first, I want to start off with some nicknames that he was given. Heydrich was considered Hitler's ideal Nazi. He was the prototypical Nazi you think of: blue eyes, blonde hair, 6'3", very kind of just a grim kind of person. He was like the embodiment of evil, and he looked that way as well. And as well, he was the butcher of Prague, which we'll touch on a little bit later, and was a big reason for his assassination. But first, before he ever became a member of the Nazi Party, he was a member of the Navy. He joined back in 1922 and was promoted to a first lieutenant in 1928. While he was in the Navy, he had numerous affairs, including 2 engagements. So basically, he was engaged to 2 different women at the same time, and that became a big controversy. And he was charged with conduct unbecoming of an officer and a gentleman and was dismissed from the Navy in 1931. He had to choose between the two fiancés, and he ended up choosing probably the wrong one. The one he didn't choose was very, very rich, and her father was very, very powerful within Germany, and it kind of ruined his life. He had very little prospects for a little while, and his future had very little direction. However, the wife that he did choose was already a member of the Nazi Party, and she introduced him to Nazism. And a few days after being discharged, he eventually joined the Nazi Party, and then a month later joined the SS. Another good thing about marrying the woman that he did for his career was that she was a friend of an associate of Heinrich Himmler, who was one of the biggest members of the Nazi Party at the time, one of the highest ranking, and she actually was able to get him an interview for Himmler's new counterintelligence service that was a division of the SS. The interview was actually canceled originally, but Heydrich went anyway, and decided that he was going to show Himmler that he really wanted to be a part of the Nazi Party. He was bought into this entirely, and that he was really the best man for the job. Himmler was extremely impressed by Heydrich during this interview. I think a lot of historians seem to believe that Heydrich's naval experience really impressed Himmler, who had dreams of being a military hero and almost live vicariously through Heydrich without even actually knowing him while he was in the Navy. After being hired by Himmler, so Heydrich quickly developed a strong network of spies after being hired by Himmler. What these spies ended up doing for him was collecting information to be used for blackmail on several members of either the Nazi Party or people that were resisting the Nazi Party's rule. Basically, this network developed super quickly and was super strong, and it really impressed some of the higher ups, including Himmler, and then especially Himmler, but then also even people higher up than him, including Adolf Hitler. One of the things that was a roadblock for him immediately was rumors of him being from Jewish heritage. These were really rumors spread by enemies of him that really wanted him to lose some of his power and really felt like they were threatened by him. The investigation into Heydrich's genealogy proved he was purely German, however, and this obviously could have been very devastating for his career, as anti-Semitism was becoming even more prevalent in Nazi Germany at the time, as you would see soon later with the Holocaust becoming very, very devastating for the Jewish population in Europe.
Yeah, and one of the things that helped him out, to piggyback off of Peter, was Heinrich Himmler came to his aid in that and helped defend him in that inquiry about his bloodline and whether or not he was a true Nazi. And then, like we said, like Hitler said, this is the prototypical Nazi, right? So there's a sense of loyalty that we get to Himmler early on in this 1933-32 kind of time frame. But I know Peter's about to talk about him getting appointed to the SD head, right?
Correct. So as Mr. Vitus was saying, Heydrich was appointed to be the chief of the SD, which was the security division of the SS in 1932 by Himmler. This eventually led to Himmler and Heydrich taking over the police force of all 17 German states, or at least that was the goal. They quickly began with Bavaria, which was the home to Munich, which is one of the biggest cities in Germany, one of the most powerful places to hold for the Nazi party. And then eventually Göring transferred the power of the Gestapo to Himmler in April of 1934, which Himmler immediately appointed Heydrich as the head of. Then Göring named Heydrich as the advisor to the Prussian State Council in the same month. So this is really, really showing how quickly Heydrich was rising up and gaining power within the Nazi party. And then Rudolf Hess also declared the SD the official Nazi intelligence service in June of 1934, which was it wasn't technically a promotion for Heydrich, but a promotion for the SD as a whole, which by association promoted Heydrich to become one of the more powerful members of the Nazi party.
Yeah, it gives them more resources. They take a previously existing German intelligence and they mold it into the SD and put it under the umbrella of the SS. And so all of a sudden, Heydrich is the guy that has all of the transcripts, all of the documentation on everybody. And as Peter said earlier, blackmail information and things like that. And it gave them the authority they needed. And this all directly leads to what's going to happen with the SA.
Right. So as he was alluding to, that Hitler was really felt threatened by certain members of the SA, especially Ernst Röhm. He was the leader of the SA, and he was quickly gaining a very big following. He feared him as a political rival, especially within the Nazi party, but also for the rule of Germany as a whole. Because the SA was so big, containing millions of Germans, Hitler believed that Röhm was going to be supported by all of the SA members, which would have really been difficult for him to defeat. So Hitler decided to devise a plan where Heydrich and the SD would swiftly move to create death lists that would be used to eliminate some of the higher members of the SA, including Ernst Röhm. At the time, the SA was still the lead paramilitary group, so this was kind of a backstabbing in a way for Hitler to choose the SD over the SA. And this eventually led to the Night of Long Knives, which I was alluding to, ended up with Heydrich, Himmler, and Göring all creating death lists, beginning with the highest ranking members of the SA. What this eventually led to was Röhm, and other high ranking members being shot without ever being given a trial by the German courts. And it eventually led to about 200 people being killed. And this was done in about 48 hours, which is ridiculously efficient, showing just how brutal and efficient Heydrich was with everything that he really did.
And there's mass arrests all around the country over this. And like you said, they execute high-ranking members of the SA. It's funny because each of the guys that you mentioned Heydrich, Himmler, Göring, they all had issues with Ernst Röhm. And they all fed to Hitler the idea that Ernst Röhm was plotting against him, which maybe is true, maybe it's not. But either way, they bought into it, and they end up arresting all these people and killing them. And there's a lot of levels to that. But what's I find interesting is that it is well known about, like it's documented. It's in German newspapers and it's in American newspapers. In Germany, they are going to label this as like killing the rot from within, right? Making Germany purer, right? In America, and the New York Times has a headline basically talking about how this is just this horrible state that just arbitrarily killed 200 people for no reason. So, no, very, very good. Peter, I think you're moving on to some of the propaganda movements anyway.
Right. So within Germany, Heydrich was put in charge of the Berlin Olympics, which is a huge pop culture event, not only in Germany, but for the entire world. And it's something that many historians and just people in general think about when they think of Nazi Germany. They think of those pictures and videos of Jesse Owens on the podium and how he was in a state of oppression, but still was able to be victorious. Heydrich was put in charge of being in charge of the propaganda that was involved within Germany during the Olympics. So he basically implemented rules of no anti-Jewish violence allowed. And a big thing was the censorship of Nazi newspaper Der Stürmer, which was the lead Nazi tabloid at the time. That was forbidden to appear on any newsstands publicly. And following the Olympics, Heydrich gathered information about the public opinion of the Olympics and what people had to say about Nazi Germany, both within and without Germany. And what he did with this information was that he ordered the Gestapo to arrest those who didn't support Nazism within Germany. And then he moved on to look at further territories, including including Austria. Austria is ethnically German, has a very big German population, German speaking. And so many of the Austrians kind of believe that they are part of Germany. And so Hitler was kind of pressuring Austria's leadership to join Nazi Germany within a merger. And the Austrian chancellor pretty much refused to merge with Germany. So Heydrich took it upon himself to organize Nazi demonstrations within Austria, which also led to an increase in propaganda. This eventually led to the Austrian chancellor succumbing to the pressure and the propaganda, leading to an eventual unification of Germany and Austria.
So I have a question for you guys. Why do you think Heydrich and obviously the Nazi high command, why do you think they put so much onus on restricting anti-Jewish acts during the Olympics? Well, why did they? Because they're obviously doing it. That's post Nuremberg laws. So why do they try and hide that aspect of the country during the Olympics?
I believe that was because they didn't think they were at their fullest power yet. And because the Olympics is such a worldwide event that has so much news coverage that would have been covered daily and nightly within powers like the United States, within Britain, within Russia, they wanted to basically convince them that that nobody's really at any risk right now. And if they showed that there was Jewish violence going on within Germany at the time, that would have likely led to a declaration of war by at least one of those countries, with multiple other ones probably following suit soon.
Similar to Peter, I also believe that they didn't really want to display it as they weren't to their full power, but I also want to believe that the Nazi party who ran Germany didn't want to show a state of disorganization, and those violence campaigns that took place against the Jewish people from German citizens showed that their country was a place of violence, which is not what they wanted to portray. They wanted to portray that they were the ultimate final country.
Okay. All right. Now, Heydrich has a big role to play in obviously the ultimate kind of Nazi atrocity, which is the Holocaust. He's a very key figure in this. And so what did you guys find out about that?
Sorry, we're going to make a little time jump a little bit. So the Olympics and the propaganda that we were talking about in Austria were happening in about 1936 and 1937. So we're going to jump about 4 to 5 years in the future to about 1941. And in July of 1941, Hermann Göring, under the power of Hitler, basically commissioned Heydrich to create a final solution to what they called the Jewish question, or the Jewish problem. This was a big role for Heydrich to fill. He was not yet considered to be, one of the top echelon members of the Nazi leadership, but this pretty much confirmed that Hitler viewed him as one of the highest and the most powerful members. Initially, Heydrich kind of wanted to ship the Jewish people away from Europe. His initial plan was to ship them to the African country island of Madagascar. The problem with this was that Britain controlled the potential waterways that they had to ship them. Britain is in the Atlantic Ocean, so they had a very, very good chance of blocking them in the Atlantic Ocean. And if Germany wanted to ship them through the Mediterranean Sea, they would have to go through the British-controlled Suez Canal, which would have been a real problem for them. Because this was a no-go, he basically decided that, okay, well, if I can't ship them off via water, I have to keep them on land in Europe. And he devised a plan to have wholesale mass immigrations of the Jewish people, mostly to Poland, into concentration camps where they would systematically be killed massively.
Yeah. So the Wannsee Conference, which I think is something interesting, because both you and Kenny, both Peter and Kenny, got to go to the Wannsee House. And obviously, as I know Peter was going to say, it was kind of run by Adolf Eichmann, who's going to be one of the last Nazi officials to really be arrested in 1960. But it was led by Adolf Eichmann, and Heydrich's in charge of the whole thing. And so, what was it like for you guys going to the Wannsee House and seeing the area where they made, obviously the final plans for the Holocaust?
I'd say it's such a strange experience driving up that mountain that it's on in the bus that we were in, just looking at it, noting that this is the house where lives of millions of people were determined. It was so strange to me walking in the halls that these awful human disgusting monsters were in, and it was so weird to me that it was pretty much just a dinner party that they decided oh yeah, we're gonna kill this entire population of human beings. And
yeah, it's like a two hour dinner party, right? Hors d'oeuvres, drinks, entree. and it's just in a house.
And that's what kind of like gets to me. It's such a casual affair to them, whereas like, first off, it's not a conversation that anyone should be having, but if it was a conversation that someone was happening, like, I don't think it should be a casual dinner party. And it was just treated as like another, like, whatever day the Wannsee conference took place on. And that's so frightening to me that these people have divulged so differently from human empathy to just complete stone cold iron hardness.
And for me, I guess in a way, it was very weird to see the contrast between the evilness of the Nazis and pretty much how evil, like I was saying, how evil they are, and what took place within the house at the conference, and kind of just how beautiful the house was. It is a very gorgeous house with on the water, just 20-30 minutes away from Berlin. It's just a great, it looks like a great place to stay. But when you get in and start to hear about some of the atrocities that took place in there, you start to feel very, very strange. And it was just really weird for me to experience that going up to it. I knew going up to it that the Wannsee conference happened in there, but I was blown away by the scenery at first. And then I was pretty much devastated to hear about really what took place in the house.
Yeah. And I like what you put in there. You said, what is it? 90 minutes to determine what?
90 minutes to determine the life and fate of 6 million people.
Right. And I think that's such a powerful statement because, as Kenny said, as you just said, it's just a 90-minute meeting. And inside of that 90 minutes, they determine the fate of all of these people with the creation of death camps. And it's something that's truly, truly horrible. So let's actually move past Wannsee. And so what happens to him summer 41? What's going on with Heydrich?
Right. So during the summer of 41 is really when we start to see Heydrich become a full-fledged megalomaniac. He is considering that his power is being right. So he was given a lot of power and was starting to consider himself, rightfully so, as one of the highest members of the Nazi party. And then he's starting to consider his future in what he believes will become an Atlantic to Ural empire, which is basically from the Atlantic Ocean to the Ural mountain range that's over in Eastern Europe, pretty much all the way over in Russia. He attempted to sabotage the sitting Reichsprotector, which actually translates to the protector of the Reich, so that he could eventually earn this position and ascend to, and this basically showed that he was ready to ascend to power by any means necessary, whether that be sabotaging relatively innocent people. He is a member of the Nazi party, but Van Neurath didn't really do anything to pretty much relieve himself of the duties. But Heydrich was willing to show that anything that he possibly could do, Heydrich could do better. Yeah,
he has a track record of this, right? Ernst Röhm, who he orders the death of, is the godfather of one of his children. So this is a guy who clearly has personal relationships, but doesn't really care about these people if he has to go, if it's going to lead to his promotion. So yeah, no, that's a very good point, Peter. So what about his time with the Czechs? What happens there?
Right. So when he was promoted to be the Reichsprotector, he was put in charge of German occupied Czechia, including the Sudetenland, which was a very strategic place for either the Allies or the Axis powers, because it gave them so many different kind of resources. So Heydrich being in charge of those resources was a huge deal, and he wanted to protect them at any cost, and believed Heydrich believed that the Czechs had no business being in Czechia, and that it should be completely German, and that they should be speaking German, and that they should have German culture. And he wanted to basically eliminate all Czechian pride and basically eliminate them as a race. And he did so because Hitler indicated that he was furious with the Czechs, and Heydrich wanted to do anything he could do to please Hitler, as he viewed himself as a potential candidate to be a successor to Hitler. While he was in Prague, Heydrich arrived with very long arrest lists, many of those sentenced to death. A lot of the first victims took place in underground activities, showing that even though these people they were hiding their beliefs, they were still considered to be threats to Germany's power within Czechia. Heydrich also severed all radio links to London within days. So London had no access to anything that was going on within Czechia. They had no understanding of the atrocities that Heydrich and the Nazis were committing within Czechia. And Heydrich also removed 500 suspects very soon after he severed radio lines with London. Of those he believed were those trying to resist Nazi power, even if those were completely unbased accusations.
Yeah, and I think that this is where Heydrich gets the nickname the Butcher of Prague, because they murder a lot of people in Prague. And I think Kenny's going to talk a little bit about Operation Anthropod, and what we'll save that for him. But the reality on the ground, as Peter just said, is that when Heydrich comes in, he more or less squashes the resistance in Prague. They were doing what are called work slowdowns, where they were essentially just working slowly. And they started arresting people who were in charge of these factories, doing public executions in front of people. So people would then be like motivated to work. And they arrested a lot of people and they tortured a lot of people. Part of this is because, his background with the SD, they were doing that in Germany for years before this. And then you combine that with being in charge of the Ensetgruppen, which we didn't really get into, but that's mobile killing squads. And so that's where the real brutality of Heydrich starts, with those mobile killing squads that are sent out into Russia, especially. But really, when they invaded Poland, when they invaded France, when they're in all of those engagements, their sole purpose is to go out. They seize record halls so they can get information on people. They create lists. They go and arrest people and they murder them. And they do this in Prague with people who are suspected to be resistance members. And this is going to, I think, feed into what we talk about at the end of the podcast. But I know Kenny's going to get us into Operation Anthropod, which is, it starts in England, right? This is an English operation combined with the exiled Czech government. So I'll turn it over to Kenny.
So Operation Anthropod began a couple days after Heydrich took control of Czechia, and in union with the British Special Forces, which provided training and funding for the assassins, and the Central Committee for Homeland Resistance, which, as Mr. Arvaides alluded to, was headed by the ex-president of Czechoslovakia, which provided transport and hiding places in Czechoslovakia, along with additional training on the landscape and routes. In union with the Sokol, which was another holdout with ex-militant groups hiding out in a gymnasium, I believe, as it was an ex-gym for them. They updated the assassins who I'm about to get into on the routes that Heydrich took and the landscape that they would be covering. So the attackers, Jan Kubiš and Joseph Gabik, were trained by the Scottish Guard at one of the British Special Operations Executive Training Center, and they finished training in December in 1941, which is a month after the operation planning began. So they received false documents from the British Special Forces that allowed them to travel to Nazi-occupied Europe to eventually get to Czechoslovakia. When they got to Prague, they talked with the Central Committee for Homeland Resistance first to formulate two plans. One would assassinate him on a train, and the other would to be pull a cable across the force to stop his car. The plan involving the cable across the road seemed to be more viable. Heydrich was planned to move to Chateau in Pansky Brezany.
So Kenny, we're gonna have a teaching moment on the podcast today. You don't need to get caught up in words you can't pronounce. So you find different ways to do it or don't do it at all. But basically what they do to help Kenny out a little bit is they map out Heydrich's commute. He's staying in a chateau, a castle, which is, I want to say, north of Prague. And he takes the same route every day and he rides in a convertible. And these two guys, and there's more people that are dropped in at the time, but Kubiš and Gabek, they were trained by the British Special Forces. They're two of about 150 people trained for this mission, and they're selected from there. They weed it down, obviously. And these are Czech exiles. So they were former military, both of them, and they're living in England and they're exiled. They drop them in. And so they're going to monitor Heydrich for a couple of months. And actually in England, they think the whole thing failed because they don't hear from him for a while. And the local resistance on the ground, the local Czech resistance, does not want this to happen because they are petrified of possible repercussions. They try to message London, and London says, no, we're going to do this. But yeah, these guys are there. And actually from the very beginning, there's some mess ups, but they're going to be there and they're mapping out where he is. And so they figure out where he is. And so I'm going to leave you off. He's about 9 miles right north of Prague, and they're not going to use a cable to stop his car, right? What are they going to do?
So the plan develops into one of the assassins jumping out in front of the car with a gun to shoot him as he's driving, because the driver has to slow down to make a sharp turn on his way to the airport or the meeting room. They didn't quite know what's the final destination that he was going to be. They just knew that there was a sharp turn in the route. So they were going to stop near the corner. One would have a gun and one would have an modified anti-tank grenade to blow up the car if the gun failed, which inevitably did, I'm going to pass it off to Jack to tell you more about the actual operation.
So the operation at about 10:35 in the morning, Heydrich's driver started to like slow down to make the turn. And then when he turned the corner, Gabčík jumped in front of the gun with his car and pointed it right at Heydrich, but the gun failed, which caused Heydrich to stand up and drew his pistol and yelled at the driver to stop. This is when Cubis threw a grenade at the car, but it landed right against the rear wheel and it went through the car's right fender, which damaged Heydrich with I think it's
shrapnel. Yeah.
So then Heydrich and Klein, which was the driver, both got out the car with their pistols drawn. The driver ran for Cubis and Heydrich chased Gabčík. Cubis was injured in the shrapnel, but was able to jump on a bike and pedal away to, I want to say it was a bus stop.
Yeah. He just gets away.
And then Klein tried to shoot at him, but jammed the gun on accident. Heydrich and Gabčík had a mini shootout, sort of, but because Heydrich was damaged from the explosion, he collapsed in pain on the side of the road, and Gabčík just ran. And then later, since Klein was missed, what's his name, Cubis, he was ordered by Heydrich to chase after Gabčík, and Gabčík ran into a village, and he got to a nearby butcher shop where he expected them to help him. But they were actually not Nazi sympathizers, so he had to figure out something else to do, but he couldn't run to the street out of fear that Klein was going to be looking for him in the street. But shockingly, they both ran into each other at the shop, and Gabčík just shot Klein in the leg twice and ran to a tram and got into a safe house. This caused, soldiers got into
it causes an immediate panic. Yeah.
Heydrich was sent to the hospital, Bovilka Hospital, to be operated on, where he was in there for about a week, and he actually started to recover really well. But then he had collapsed, went to a shock, and then fell into a coma that he never recovered from. And I'm pretty sure he woke up from the coma a few hours before he died, actually, and said come over or something like that to his wife.
Yeah.
And he died in the early hours of June 4th.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because it's really infection that kills him. And they had to wait a long time for him to actually get a doctor. And Himmler sends his own private physician to help treat him, which there's loads of conspiracy theories about that I don't think really have any validity. But he sends his private doctor and he dies. And the aftermath of that is going to be really rough, right? One of the things I want to point out, and I don't think you guys have it in there, his funeral is a big deal, right? Mm-hmm. Hitler gives his eulogy. Hermann Göring speaks at his funeral, right? Goebbels speaks. I mean, this is the Nazi funeral. And Hitler actually has to be calmed down by Himmler and other Nazi officials because he wants way more retribution. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kenny to talk about what happens with this state of emergency that's going to be declared.
So as soon as word got back to Germany and the headquarters in Germany, immediate state of emergency was declared and posters started to appear about any info regarding the attack. The Gestapo was called over, and the first responding people were Otto Gerschek and K.H. Frank, and they ordered the blocking of all exits out of Prague as a way to prevent the assassins from leaving. Hitler and other ranking Nazi officials were called on the death of Heydrich. Hitler's security was bumped up, heavily adding armored,
plating
to his car and an entourage for his protection. And I'm assuming they probably use a closed-top car from now on.
Yeah. Though not always. I mean, they're going to feel safe in their own areas, but yeah, they're going to be way more cautious.
So this, in an attempt to prevent any further assassinations and a removed naive notion that the Nazis were untouchable, increased paranoia among the inner circle. This is the main cause of the paranoia that you see in late Nazi officials regarding everybody's out to get me. And then of course, all the crazy just orders that they give. in regard to that, orders were broadcasted over loudspeakers in the city not to move or they'll be shot where they stand in the immediate area. Later on, people were forbid from owning weapons, harboring the fugitive, of course, and effectively martial law was declared, installing a curfew in the cities of Bohemia and Moravia. And then the mass murder of Czechs began. There were no trials. If you had a rumor about you, you were pretty much investigated. And if there was any merit, or sometimes if there even wasn't any merit, you would just be shot and killed. A nice quote that I like to think about, it was from the Prague and Black Nazi Rule, Czech Nationalism by Chad Bryant, published in 2007. Paranoia and rage spread among Nazi leaders and protectorate Germans. Less than an hour after the assassination attempt, Hitler ordered Frank and Minister to order the execution of up to 10,000 Czechs, some from among the concentration camps and some from among the protectorate's general population. I think that's just such a crazy quote. It just shows the amount of evil that was just in this heart of government.
Well, and it shows you how important Heydrich was, right? Hitler's saying his life's worth 10,000 Czech lives. And that's just a knee-jerk reaction. He calls for the killing of whole towns, as we'll talk about. At one point, he wanted the arrest of every male in Prague, which wasn't, that wasn't going to happen. That was more of a rant. But these are the things that they kind of call for. And look, there's going to be a big search, right, for these assassins. And let's talk about, so what happens to their families in the surrounding area?
So family members of the parachutists were executed brutally. This even included some people who were just suspected of parachuting into the country. Their families were killed. And this directly leads to the village of Lidus being destroyed. The SS killed the men, sent the women to concentration camps where around 50% of them were just immediately sent to gas chambers and killed. And the children were either taken prisoner, gassed to death, or adopted by German families as they were Aryan enough to pass as a German child. The village was completely destroyed and burnt, leaving nothing but a field of ashes, essentially. And this was off of one order to just make the Czech people suffer essentially. And this happened again to the village of Lizaki. The SS went to another village in the southwestern Bohemia and did the same exact thing, and the assassins were still not found. On June 24th, the assassins were still not found. In 48 hours, the population of Prague were to be slaughtered. And this was a direct order from head Nazi officials. And I believe it was to be taken seriously as they were really upping the antes on the search and the punishment for essentially just being anywhere associated to this group.
Yeah, aiding them at all essentially would get you killed, right? And they put a bounty on them for 1 million marks. And so this is a really big thing. So how do they end up finding them?
So the next day after that 48-hour parameter was set up, a fellow assassin by the name of Karl Kurda reported to the basement of St. Bartholomew's Oxidor's Orthodox Church on Rezolvia Street. A quote from the priest at the church at the time was, "The problem is that they were looking for various hideouts around Prague, but unfortunately they did not find any people who would be willing to help them. They even asked other churches, different priests from other churches around this area, but the only ones who offered them a hideout were the Orthodox people that were at this church." So essentially what this quote is trying to get at is that the assassins were hiding in this church. The person who reported them, actually, after the end of the war, they were hanged for treason,
being a collaborator. Yeah.
And many historians don't even know why they did it. Some people assume that it's because of the protection of their family, and others like to suggest that it's because they wanted the 1 million mark reward. So as soon as this was reported, the encirclement from Nazi soldiers began, and the capture of the two men occurred hours later. And along in this church, there were around, I believe, 10 or so, a dozen other people aiding them, parachutists, and they all either died from the shootout that occurred between the Nazi soldiers and them, or they committed suicide once they started closing in.
Yeah, there's a number of people who either get shot in the actual shootout, or there are people who got arrested in and around it, either the day before or the day after, who were bringing them food and everything else. But it's all in broad daylight. The SS comes in and they're in this church, and they end up trying to hide out in the basement. What ends up happening is the SS takes fire hoses and they flood the basement, and the guys commit suicide down there, which is obviously very sad. To move on to the end, right? In Prague, what's the estimate? How many people, how many Czechs were executed in reprisal?
So like a direct association from General Kurt estimated that 1,331 Czechs were executed. 201 of them were women, and 3,000 Jews were also directly executed at this time, just as like Czech Jews, obviously, as just like a reparation for like killing Heydrich. And so there's some other numbers involved, and it leads to a rough estimate around 5,000 Czechs.
Yeah, the first estimate is just in Prague, right? 1,300 is just the one city, and then it's 5,000 Czechs overall in this aftermath. And so that kind of brings us in, and I think this will be where we end the podcast with this kind of a question, and for all three of you to think about is, you have this event where these guys parachute in, they assassinate this really important official. Was it worth it? Was it worth the reprisals? Was it worth the event? You know, how do you feel about, you know, what happened? Or is this, you know, really, I mean, these are people standing up for their country, right? Trying to resist at all costs. What are your thoughts on this?
I believe that no death is justified. Well, in a sense of resistance. And so I think that this resistance was necessary, as if Heydrich was left alive, he would have led to the killing of a lot more Czech people, as Hitler directly ordered the cleansing of these people. So with his track record of being a leader of the Ensetgruppen and all these other powerful Nazi head positions that he filled, I believe he would have done what Hitler required him to do, or asked of him to do. And it would have led to a lot more deaths than 5,000.
Yeah, and clearly, I mean, he's in charge of the final solution, the Holocaust. So he's still in charge of that. Like, that doesn't stop, because he multitasks. And so the question some people also ask is, if he's having more direct authority, no one else fills the void of him after this. There's multiple people who will be in charge of various aspects of the Holocaust, but that overarching guy isn't really there anymore. And so would it have been more efficient? Would it have caused the deaths of, you know, a couple 10,000 more people, 100,000 more people, right? It's kind of hard to know, but it's a good point, Kenny. Jack, what do you think?
I think obviously like these innocent people should not have died because of this, but also at the same time, how many people would Heydrich killed if he was still alive? Like, how many more people could have died? But also I think, like, if we look at resistance movement historically, I feel like we always see some type of innocent civilian death that comes with these resistance movements. So,
all right, Peter.
In my mind, I personally think about what this meant for the Nazi high command and the government officials. While yes, it ended up being more oppressive for the Czechs as a whole, for all of Europe and even the world, arguably, this meant that the Nazi officials were basically in a state of paranoia all the time, where they never really knew who to trust, if they could trust anyone. And that wasn't even just within foreign countries, that was within their own government system. There was a lot of paranoia within Nazi officials, and they all kind of believed Heydrich was this untouchable kind of hero. And as did Heydrich, as can be seen by him driving around a place where he's hated in a convertible where he can easily be shot.
Well, and he wanted them to see him. Mm-hmm. That was the idea. It's a power play, which ultimately, it's not even why he got killed. He got killed because of shrapnel and bad luck. Let me ask this. So Kenny and Peter, you guys last year came with me, and we went to Warsaw. And we went over and went to the spots of the Warsaw Uprising, which there's two, right? There's the ghetto uprising and the concentration camp. There's also the Warsaw City Uprising. And in both of those, there were a lot of civilian deaths and a lot of people died. In the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, pretty much everyone involved in it gets killed. And they're your age, right? They're 17, 18, 19 years old. Do you remember what our Polish tour guide said when we asked him the question about is resistance worth it? He was very confused by the discussion. And what I mean for that is, for him, he was from Poland, right, Bart? He's from Poland, and he said in his country, the way they're taught about this, they don't even ask the question. Of course it was worth it, because they were standing up to oppression, to people who were doing unthinkable things. And I found that to be such an interesting perspective, because obviously none of us are from Eastern Europe. None of us are from, the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia then, or Poland. And so we don't live with that day to day. But for the people in the countries that were involved, historically, I think the thought process now is that even through the darkest times, they were able to stand up in one voice and combat this. Now, for this instance, the odds that this was ever going to work are like infinitely low. Like both of them think they're going to die no matter what. And they do. But it ends up working by accident, right? Because it wasn't the gunshots. It was just shrapnel off of a poorly placed grenade. But it did work, and it led to the deaths of thousands of people and maybe saved the lives of more. But I think this is a good job, guys. I hope you enjoyed researching the topic. Do you have anything else you want to add before we go?
I would like to add that as Americans, we're always taught about how we revolted against an oppressive form of government. But I think learning more in this class and on the trip I went last year, I feel like we really didn't revolt in the sense that many other people in the world associate revolt with. If I'm remembering correctly, Poland was invaded around 8 times, right? Or
it's invaded a lot, right? I mean, you have the Nazi invasion, then the Soviet invasion, which is at the same time, then the Nazis invade the rest of it. That's 3, right? And then the Soviets are going to invade it, and they're going to keep it, right? So that's 4 just in the war. And then they're going to have the whole next 50 years of oppression during the Cold War. And so to your point, yeah, Poland has dealt with a lot, and they resisted that entire time, right? And I'm glad I think that's what you were getting at, is like, that country is built on resistance. And do you remember, both of you, when we walked, it was nighttime, we walk out and I think we were in Warsaw, and you guys are looking around because did it look like you expected it was going to look?
No.
There's like billboards. It's very like, it seems westernized as a modern city. And so I think that's really good. But we're going to end it on this. Thank you guys. This is Tigers by the Fire, episode 6 of season 6. Thank you for listening.